For many Canadians, especially seniors who have watched this country grow over decades, the current political atmosphere feels different. It feels heavier. Conversations that once sounded extreme are now being discussed seriously in public meetings, on news panels, and even inside provincial legislatures. Western provinces such as Alberta and Saskatchewan are no longer just expressing frustration with Ottawa. They are talking about formal steps toward greater autonomy, and in some discussions, even statehood. For years, people in the West have said they feel ignored by federal decision-makers. They argue that policies made in Ottawa do not always reflect the economic realities of the Western provinces. These provinces are rich in natural resources, oil, gas, agriculture, mining. They contribute significantly to the national economy. Yet many residents believe they face heavy federal regulations, environmental restrictions, and tax structures that limit their ability to grow. This feeling is not new. The term Western alienation has existed for decades. But what is new is the level of organization behind the current movement. Instead of emotional protests alone, we are now seeing petitions, structured campaigns, and legal discussions about what autonomy or separation would actually require. That shift from frustration to planning is what makes this moment serious. Let's be clear. No province can simply leave Canada overnight. The Constitution does not allow that. If a province wanted to separate, it would require a clear referendum question, majority public support, and then long negotiations with the federal government. The Supreme Court has already ruled on this in past cases. Separation, if it ever happened, would be a long legal process, not a sudden event. However, even talking about these steps shows how strong the frustration has become. When political leaders begin adjusting referendum laws or reviewing provincial powers, it signals preparation. It does not guarantee separation, but it does show they want leverage in negotiations with Ottawa. Many Western residents argue that federal policies have slowed pipeline development and resource projects. They say billions of dollars in potential revenue have been lost. They also point to equalization payments and fiscal redistribution as unfair. On the other hand, supporters of the current system argue that national unity requires sharing wealth and balancing regional differences. They say Canada functions because provinces support one another. This is where emotions begin to rise. For seniors who remember past national debates, such as Quebec's referendums in 1980 and 1995, today's situation may feel familiar. Back then, the country also faced uncertainty. There were heated discussions about identity, economics, and unity. Canada remained together, but the tension was very real. Today's debate is different because it involves multiple Western regions at the same time. Alberta may be leading the discussion, but Saskatchewan and voices in British Columbia are also participating. Manitoba's position is more complicated because of geography and trade routes. If major Western provinces change their status, Manitoba would face difficult economic decisions. Another important factor is Indigenous communities. Many First Nations leaders have made it clear that treaty rights must be respected in any political change. These treaties are legally binding agreements. No province could ignore them. This adds another serious legal layer to any discussion about separation or statehood. There is also the economic question. Seniors especially worry about pensions, healthcare funding, and currency stability. If provinces were to seek independence or stronger autonomy, what would happen to federal benefits? Would there be new taxes? Would trade agreements change? These are not emotional questions, they are practical ones. Stability matters, especially for people living on fixed incomes. Ottawa now finds itself in a difficult position. If federal leaders dismiss the Western concerns, frustration could grow stronger. But if they make major concessions, it could encourage other regions to demand similar changes. The government must find a careful balance between protecting national unity and addressing regional dissatisfaction. At the same time, most Canadians across the country still support remaining united. Polls consistently show that a majority do not want full separation. However, there is growing support for renegotiating certain federal-provincial arrangements. This suggests that while people may not want to break apart, they do want change. The discussion about joining the United States also appears in some conversations. While this idea gains attention online and in political commentary, it remains controversial. Most Canadians say they value national identity and independence. Still, the fact that the topic is even being debated shows how intense the frustration has become in certain areas. What we are witnessing right now is not chaos, but tension. It is not collapse, but pressure. Western provinces are signaling that they want more control over their resources, their regulations, and their economic future. Ottawa must now decide how to respond, through negotiation, reform, or firm defense of the current system. This is why some analysts are calling it a national reckoning. A reckoning does not mean destruction. It means facing unresolved issues directly. Canada has reached moments like this before. Each time, the country had to ask difficult questions about fairness, identity, and governance. In the next few months, discussions will likely intensify. There may be more rallies, more debates, and possibly new legislative proposals. Financial markets and businesses will watch carefully. Ordinary families will look for reassurance that their livelihoods remain secure. For now, Canada remains united. There is no official separation underway. But the tone of the conversation has clearly changed. Western provinces are not speaking quietly anymore. They are speaking formally, strategically, and publicly. And that alone makes this a defining political moment. As this discussion grows, many Canadians, especially seniors, are asking a very simple question: what would actually happen if a province tried to separate? The answer is not dramatic or immediate. It would be slow, legal, and complicated. First, there would need to be a clear referendum question. It cannot be vague. It must clearly ask voters whether they want to leave Canada. Then, a majority of voters would need to say yes. Even after that, separation would not happen automatically. The federal government would be required to negotiate. Those negotiations could take years. Issues like borders, debt, pensions, military assets, trade agreements, and currency would all need to be discussed carefully. For seniors, pensions and healthcare are among the biggest concerns. Canada Pension Plan payments, old age security, and federal healthcare transfers are deeply connected to national systems. If a province separated, leaders would have to decide whether to create new provincial versions of these programs or negotiate shared arrangements with Ottawa. Nothing would happen overnight, but uncertainty during negotiations could cause anxiety in financial markets and among retirees. There is also the question of debt. Canada carries national debt, and provinces carry their own debt as well. If a province became independent, it would likely be responsible for taking on a share of the federal debt. That could affect taxes and government spending inside that new province. These financial realities are serious and cannot be ignored. Trade is another major issue. Western provinces rely heavily on exporting oil, gas, grain, minerals, and other products. Currently, they benefit from Canada's national trade agreements. If they separated, they would need to renegotiate trade deals. That process can be long and complex. Businesses prefer stability, and uncertainty can slow investment. Some supporters of statehood argue that closer ties with the United States would provide economic strength. They say access to larger markets and fewer regulations could help growth. However, joining another country would require approval not only within Canada but also from the United States. It would involve legal steps on both sides of the border. It is not something that could happen quickly or easily. Meanwhile, Indigenous treaty rights remain a central part of this conversation. Many treaties are agreements between First Nations and the Crown, meaning the federal government. If a province changed its status, those treaties would still exist. Indigenous communities would have legal standing and constitutional protections. Any attempt to move forward without addressing treaty obligations would likely face immediate legal challenges. In Ottawa, federal leaders are aware of all these complexities. Publicly, they often speak calmly, emphasizing unity and constitutional order. Behind the scenes, however, advisors are certainly reviewing legal frameworks and preparing responses. A national government cannot ignore even the possibility of separation discussions. It is also important to recognize that public opinion is not one-sided. While support for greater autonomy has grown in parts of the West, there are many citizens in those same provinces who strongly oppose separation. They worry about economic risk, international uncertainty, and loss of national identity. Canada has always been built on compromise between regions, languages, and cultures. That history still matters to many people. Quebec's past referendums offer a lesson. In 1995, the vote to leave Canada was extremely close. The country felt divided and uncertain. But after intense debate and negotiation, Canada remained united. Over time, tensions cooled. This shows that strong political emotions do not always lead to permanent separation. Sometimes they lead to reforms instead. Today, Western provinces may be using the idea of statehood as leverage. In politics, strong demands can sometimes force negotiations. Provincial leaders may believe that by raising the stakes, they can gain more control over taxation, natural resources, and regulatory authority without fully separating. For seniors who have lived through multiple political cycles, one truth stands out: moments of tension often feel dramatic in the present, but long-term stability usually depends on careful negotiation. Emotional speeches may capture headlines, but constitutional change requires patience, legal clarity, and broad public support. Right now, Canada stands at a crossroads, not because separation is certain, but because trust between regions feels strained. Western provinces are clearly signaling that they want adjustments in how the federation works. Ottawa must decide whether to offer reforms or defend the current structure firmly. The coming years may bring more debates, more polls, and possibly formal referendum campaigns. But change, if it comes, will be deliberate and structured. There is no overnight collapse. There is no instant transformation. What we are seeing is political pressure building through legal and democratic channels. For viewers watching at home, especially seniors who care deeply about national stability, the most important thing is to stay informed and avoid panic. Democracies are designed to handle disagreement. Canada has faced serious challenges before: constitutional debates, economic crises, regional tensions, and it has remained standing. The question now is whether this moment will lead to deeper division or meaningful reform. Will Western frustration reshape federal policy? Or will the strength of national unity hold firm once again? That answer will depend not just on politicians, but on voters. Public opinion, calm discussion, and informed participation will shape what happens next. One thing is certain: this conversation is no longer on the margins. It has entered the mainstream. And how Canada responds will define the next chapter of its political history. So now the real question becomes: is this the beginning of separation or the beginning of serious negotiation? Only time and the Canadian people will decide.